You've been living a lie so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of your identity, that questioning it feels like questioning your own existence. You've been taught that warmth draws people closer, that kindness is magnetic, that being the person who always says yes makes you beloved. But right now, in this moment of brutal honesty, look around you. Where has this gotten you? Who are the people in your life who truly respect you? Not those who need you, not those who use you, but those who genuinely respect you. The silence that follows this question is telling, isn't it? You've been operating under the delusion that your accommodating nature, your endless availability, your willingness to sacrifice your own needs for others makes you attractive. But the people who truly command respect, who draw others into their orbit like gravity itself, who make rooms shift when they enter, operate from a place you've been conditioned to fear, cold, calculated logic. They understand something about human psychology that you've been systematically programmed to ignore. Tonight, we strip away the comfortable lies about human attraction and reveal why your desperate warmth has been repelling the very people you want to impress most. Every time you make yourself completely available, you become invisible. Every time you reveal all your thoughts, share every emotion, offer every piece of yourself freely, you become predictable. And predictable things lose their power to fascinate. Think about the people who captivate you, who make your mind race when they enter a room, who leave you wondering what they're thinking long after they've gone. Do they tell you everything? Do they respond to your messages immediately? Do they rearrange their schedules to accommodate your every whim? Of course not. They understand something fundamental about human psychology that you've been giving away like a street performer desperate for applause. That desire grows in the space between what is known and what remains hidden. You've been living in the illusion that transparency equals intimacy, that availability equals value, that giving everything freely somehow makes you more attractive. But scarcity creates value. Mystery generates intrigue. The people who fascinate. You understand that their attention, their time, their emotional availability are currencies, not charities. They dole out their presence strategically, not because they're manipulative, but because they understand their own worth. They know that what is easily obtained is easily discarded. You've been discarding yourself, piece by piece, in the desperate hope that someone might find the fragments valuable enough to treasure. But treasure isn't found lying scattered on the ground. It's discovered through effort, through mystery, through the recognition that something rare has been encountered. Machiavelli understood what modern psychology confirms through decades of research. Respect is not earned through kindness alone. It's calculated through consistent, logical boundaries. When you operate from pure logic, stripped of the desperate need to please, something fundamental shifts in how others perceive you. They stop seeing you as a resource to be depleted and start recognizing you as a force to be reckoned with. You've been playing a game where everyone else seems to know the rules, except you. But the rules aren't hidden. They're written in the mathematics of human interaction. Scarcity increases value. Consistency builds trust, and consequence establishes respect. When your responses become predictable, when people know they can guilt you into compliance, manipulate you with emotional appeals, or steamroll over your preferences because you'll accommodate anything to avoid conflict, you become functionally invisible. Your opinions don't matter because everyone knows you'll change them to maintain harmony. Your needs don't matter because everyone knows you'll sacrifice them for others' comfort. Your time doesn't matter because everyone knows you'll give it freely to anyone who asks. But when you operate from logic, when your decisions flow from reason rather than the desperate need for approval, people must actually consider your perspective. They can't simply assume you'll bend. They have to negotiate with you as an equal rather than managing you as a subordinate. This isn't about becoming cruel or heartless. This is about understanding that respect follows mathematical principles. And until you start applying those principles to your own life, you'll remain trapped in the exhausting cycle of giving more and receiving less. Look at your relationships with brutal honesty. How many people in your life take from you without reciprocation? How many conversations leave you drained while the other person walks away energized? How many times have you canceled your own plans to accommodate someone else's last-minute request? How many times have you bitten your tongue when you disagreed, swallowed your frustration when you were treated poorly, smiled when you wanted to scream? You've been operating from emotional poverty, believing that giving more would somehow fill the void, that depleting yourself would somehow make you more valuable. But people who command genuine attraction, who draw others toward them magnetically, operate from emotional abundance. This abundance means they can afford to withhold. They can afford to say no. They can afford to walk away from situations that don't serve them because they're not desperately clinging to every scrap of attention or validation. When you give from scarcity, from the fear that this might be your only chance to be valued, people sense that desperation. It repels them on a subconscious level because desperation signals low value. But when you give from abundance, from choice, rather than compulsion, your generosity becomes powerful because it's rare. The exhaustion you feel, the bone-deep tiredness that comes from years of emotional labor for people who would never reciprocate, that's the cost of operating from poverty. That's what happens when you mistake being needed for being valued. When you confuse depletion with virtue, when you think that sacrificing yourself somehow makes you noble rather than simply convenient for others to use. Behind every desperate act of kindness, every instance of bending over backward to accommodate others, every time you've said yes when you meant no, lies a terror so fundamental you've built your entire personality around avoiding it. The fear that if people see who you really are, logical, calculating, naturally self-interested, they will abandon you. So you've created a performance, a warm mask that hides your natural human tendency toward strategic thinking. You've convinced yourself that thinking strategically about relationships makes you manipulative, that considering your own interests makes you selfish, that operating from logic rather than pure emotion makes you cold. But the people you most admire, the ones who seem effortlessly magnetic, who command rooms without trying, who inspire both respect and fascination, they've made peace with their own calculated nature. They've stopped apologizing for thinking strategically about their time, their energy, their emotional investments. They understand that self-interest isn't evil, it's necessary for survival and success. They've realized that you can't truly serve others from a position of weakness, that you can't give what you don't have, that you can't lift others up while you're drowning yourself. The fear that keeps you performing warmth is the same fear that keeps you powerless. It's the fear that your authentic self isn't worthy of love, so you've created an inauthentic version that you hope will be more palatable. But authenticity includes your strategic mind, your self-protective instincts, your natural tendency to evaluate situations logically. When you embrace these aspects of yourself instead of hiding them, you become integrated, whole, and paradoxically more attractive to people who matter. Predictable people become furniture in other people's lives. Useful, reliable, completely taken for granted, and utterly ignorable. When someone knows exactly how you'll respond to any situation, when they can predict your reactions, manipulate your emotions, and control your behavior through familiar patterns, you cease to be a person and become a function. But when you operate from cold logic, when your responses become calculated rather than reactive, you create what psychologists call an architecture of unpredictability that commands attention. People can no longer assume how you'll respond to their emotional manipulation because you're no longer responding from emotion alone. They can't guilt you into compliance because guilt only works on people who prioritize others' feelings over their own judgment. They can't flatter you into poor decisions because flattery only works on people desperate for external validation. When your decisions flow from reason rather than feeling, from strategic thinking rather than emotional reactivity, People must actually engage with your mind instead of simply pushing your emotional buttons. This shift changes everything about how others relate to you. Suddenly, they have to consider your perspective instead of simply steamrolling over your accommodating nature. They have to actually convince you rather than simply expecting automatic compliance. They have to offer real value in exchange for your time and energy rather than assuming they can take these things freely. This isn't about becoming unpredictable for its own sake or creating chaos in your relationships. This is about becoming someone whose thoughts and decisions matter, whose perspective must be considered, whose boundaries must be respected. Yes, there's a cost to this transformation, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Operating from cold logic means accepting a fundamental loneliness that most people never acknowledge. When you stop being driven by the desperate need for approval, when you start making decisions based on strategy rather than emotion, when you refuse to diminish yourself for others' comfort, you will discover that most people are not equipped to handle someone who thinks their way through life rather than simply feeling their way through it. This creates a necessary isolation, a distance between you and those who operate purely from emotional reactivity. But this loneliness is fundamentally different from the hollow ache you feel now, surrounded by people who value your functions but not your essence, who appreciate what you do for them, but have no interest in who you actually are. The loneliness of logic is the loneliness of the sovereign, the necessary isolation that comes with refusing to be small for others' comfort. It's the loneliness of standing in your own power rather than kneeling for scraps of validation. It's the price of becoming someone whose respect must be earned rather than someone whose compliance can be assumed. This isolation isn't permanent or absolute, it's selective. It means you'll have fewer relationships, but the relationships you have will be with people who can match your energy, who respect your boundaries, who value your strategic mind rather than feeling threatened by it. Something has to die for something greater to be born. The version of you that says yes when you mean no, that swallows your opinions to keep peace, that sacrifices your needs for others' wants, that performs emotional labor for people who would never reciprocate, that apologizes for taking up space, that diminishes your own achievements to make others comfortable. This version has to die. And deaths, even necessary ones, even deaths that lead to rebirth, are painful. You'll feel the grief of releasing relationships that only existed because of your willingness to be depleted. You'll mourn the false sense of security that came from being needed, even if you were never truly wanted. You'll experience the discomfort of disappointing people who have grown accustomed to your automatic compliance. Some people will call you cold when you start operating from logic. Others will accuse you of changing, as if change towards self-respect were somehow a betrayal of who you're supposed to be for their convenience. You'll face the uncomfortable reality that many of your relationships were built on your willingness to be less than you are, to be smaller, more accommodating, more pliable than your natural state. When you stop performing this diminished version of yourself, some people will lose interest because they were never interested in you. They were interested in what you could do for them. This realization will sting. But in this death lies your rebirth. In releasing the people who only valued your compliance, you make space for those who will value your strength. In letting go of relationships built on your depletion, you create room for connections based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Here's what they never tell you about human psychology, what the self-help industry conveniently ignores, because it doesn't fit their narrative of universal love and acceptance. Detachment is more magnetic than attachment. When you stop needing others' approval to feel worthy, when your self-worth becomes internally generated rather than externally validated, when you can walk away from situations that don't serve you without desperation or regret, you become irresistible to people who themselves operate from positions of strength. The desperate energy of need, the clinging quality of someone who requires constant validation, The exhausting emotional labor of managing someone else's insecurities, these things repel powerful people because they recognize the drain. But the calm energy of self-sufficiency, the steady presence of someone who is complete within themselves, the relaxed confidence of someone who doesn't need you but chooses to engage with you, this draws people in because it's rare. You stop being someone others rescue and become someone others aspire to understand. You stop being a project and become a person worth knowing. This shift changes everything about how you move through the world. Your conversations become exchanges between equals rather than performances designed to gain approval. Your relationships become choices rather than desperate attempts to fill voids. Your presence becomes a gift rather than a burden because you're no longer constantly seeking something from others. People can relax around you because they don't have to manage your emotions or constantly reassure your fragile ego. They can be authentic with you because they know you won't crumble at the first sign of disagreement or disapproval. As you embrace cold logic, as you stop operating from the desperate need to please everyone, you'll notice your social ecosystem beginning to shift in ways that might initially feel unsettling but ultimately prove liberating. The energy vampires who have grown accustomed to feeding off your accommodating nature will naturally distance themselves because they can no longer drain you. The emotional manipulators who used guilt, flattery, and manufactured crises to control your behavior will lose interest because their tactics no longer work. The people who mistook your kindness for weakness, who took your generosity for granted, who assumed they could treat you poorly because you would always forgive and forget, they'll drift away because the dynamic that served them no longer exists. This isn't rejection, this is natural selection. Weak people are drawn to other weak people because they can manipulate them. Strong people are drawn to other strong people because they can respect them. As you become stronger, more logical, more strategic in your thinking, you'll begin attracting a different caliber of person. Those who respect strength rather than exploiting weakness. Those who value strategic thinking rather than feeling threatened by it. Those who are secure enough in themselves to appreciate someone who operates from logic rather than emotional reactivity. These people don't want another project to fix or another source of validation to drain. They want equals, partners, companions who can match their energy and contribute to their lives rather than depleting them. This is not about becoming cold to everyone. This is about becoming selectively warm, strategically generous, intentionally kind. Your warmth becomes more valuable because it's no longer automatic. Your kindness becomes more meaningful because it's chosen rather than compulsive. This transformation leads you to what you've been unconsciously seeking all along, though you may not have had words for it until now. Not to be loved by everyone, an impossible and exhausting goal, but to be respected by those who matter. Not to be needed by the weak, who drain your energy and give nothing back, but to be valued by the strong, who can appreciate what you bring and reciprocate with equal measure. When you operate from cold logic, when you make decisions based on strategy rather than emotion, when you respond from reason rather than reactivity, you stop being a supporting character in other people's stories and become the protagonist of your own. You make choices based on your own strategic interests rather than others' emotional demands. You speak when you have something valuable to contribute rather than filling silence with nervous pleasantries or desperate attempts to be liked. You give your time and energy to people and pursuits that align with your goals rather than scattering yourself across every request that comes your way. You become selective with your attention, your approval, your emotional investment because you finally understand that these things have value. People begin to recognize that earning your respect means something, that gaining your attention is an achievement, that being chosen by you is a privilege rather than an automatic right. This shift transforms you from someone who chases value to someone who creates it, from someone who begs for crumbs of recognition to someone who commands genuine respect, From someone who apologizes for existing to someone who takes up space. Unapologetically, the path forward is not about becoming heartless. That would be just another form of emotional reactivity, swinging from one extreme to another in response to past pain. True power lies in becoming strategically hearted, in integrating your logical nature with your capacity for genuine connection. You can still choose compassion, but now it comes from a position of strength rather than weakness, from abundance rather than scarcity, from choice rather than compulsion. You can still be generous with your time, energy, and resources, but now your generosity is a gift rather than a desperate attempt to buy love or approval. You can still form deep connections with others, but now these connections are based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation rather than one-sided depletion disguised as caring. You understand now that being irresistible to the right people necessarily means being unacceptable to the wrong ones. The people who are threatened by your logic, who are uncomfortable with your boundaries, who preferred you weak and accommodating, these people were never truly for you anyway. They were for the diminished version of yourself that you performed to gain their approval. But the people who are drawn to your strength, who respect your strategic thinking, who appreciate your refusal to be small for their comfort, these are your people. In this acceptance, in this integration of your logical nature with your human heart, in this embrace of your strategic mind alongside your capacity for connection, you find what you've been searching for all along, the magnetic power of authentic self. Sovereignty. You become irresistibly yourself, and that self is finally worth being. Every time you make yourself completely available, you become invisible. Every time you reveal all your thoughts, you become predictable. The people who fascinate you, who make your mind race when they enter a room, they understand something you don't. That desire grows in the space between what is known and what remains hidden. You've been giving away your mystery like a street performer, desperate for applause, not realizing that true power lies in what you choose not to reveal. Feel the weight of this truth settling in your chest. You thought generosity meant emptying yourself completely. You believed that love required total transparency, that friendship demanded constant availability, that success meant saying yes to everything. But look around you. The people who command attention, who shape decisions, who move through the world with an almost magnetic pull, they operate from a different understanding entirely. They know that scarcity creates value, that absence amplifies presence, that the withholding of yourself makes others hunger for what little you choose to give. This isn't cruelty. This is psychology. This is the fundamental architecture of human desire itself. You've spent years wondering why people lose interest in you so quickly, why your enthusiasm seems to repel rather than attract, why your openness breeds contempt rather than connection. The answer has been staring at you from every relationship that faded, every opportunity that slipped away, every moment when your eagerness transformed into someone else's indifference. Think about the last time someone truly captivated you. Was it because they shared everything? Was it because they were always available? Or was it precisely because something about them remained unreachable, untouchable, unknown? That uncertainty you felt, that delicious tension between wanting to know more and being given just enough to keep you wondering, that was your own desire responding to their mastery of scarcity. You've been operating from abundance when the world responds to limitation. Your texts are answered immediately, your presence is assumed, your thoughts are laid bare before anyone asks to see them. You've made yourself common when you should have remained rare. You've given away the very thing that could have made you irresistible, the mystery of who you are beneath the surface. But here's what they don't teach you about scarcity. It's not about manipulation or games. It's about recognizing that your attention, your time, your emotional investment, your inner world, these are precious resources. When you scatter them carelessly, when you offer them without discrimination, you're not being generous. You're being wasteful. You're devaluing the very things that could make you unforgettable, The magnetic force you've been searching for outside yourself has been inside you all along, waiting to be cultivated, waiting to be protected, waiting to be wielded with the precision of someone who finally understands their own worth. Machiavelli understood what modern psychology confirms. Respect is not earned through kindness, it's calculated through consistent, logical boundaries. When you operate from pure logic, stripped of the need to please, something shifts in how others perceive you. They stop seeing you as a resource to be depleted and start recognizing you as a force to be reckoned with. You've been playing a game where everyone else knows the rules except you. But once you understand that respect follows mathematical principles, scarcity, consistency, consequence, everything changes. Watch how people respond to those who say no without explanation, who maintain their standards without negotiation, who enforce their boundaries without apology. There's a cold precision to their interactions that you've mistaken for cruelty, but it's actually mathematics. They've calculated the exact cost of their time, their energy, their attention, and they refuse to accept anything less than fair exchange. You've been giving discounts on your worth while they operate at full price. The equation is simple. Consistent boundaries plus logical consequences equals automatic respect. No pleading required. No emotional manipulation necessary. No desperate attempts to convince anyone of your value. When you operate from this mathematical certainty, people begin to recognize that crossing you has predictable, unavoidable costs. They start to treat you differently, not because they fear you, but because they've learned to respect the consistency of your logic. You've been trying to earn respect through emotional labor, through excessive kindness, through making yourself indispensable to people who would drop you the moment something better came along. But respect isn't emotional, it's computational. It's the recognition that you operate according to principles that can't be bent, manipulated, or bypassed through charm or guilt or desperation. Think about the people whose respect you crave most. Do they respond to begging? Do they change their minds when you explain your feelings? Or do they respect only those who operate with the same mathematical precision they do, those who understand that respect is a currency that must be earned through consistent, logical behavior rather than emotional appeals? The moment you stop negotiating your boundaries, stop explaining your decisions, stop seeking approval for your standards, that's the moment people begin to calculate your worth correctly. That's when the mathematics of respect begins working in your favor. Look at your relationships honestly. How many people take from you without reciprocation? How many conversations leave you drained while the other person walks away energized? You've been operating from emotional poverty, believing that giving more would somehow fill the void. But the people who command genuine attraction, they operate from emotional abundance, which means they can afford to withhold. They understand that their energy, attention, and approval are currencies, not charities. Feel the exhaustion in your bones from years of giving what was never truly valued. You've become a well that everyone drinks from, but no one thinks to refill. You've trained people to expect your emotional labor without offering anything meaningful in return. Every time you comfort someone who never comforts you, every time you prioritize someone who treats you as an option, every time you give your best energy to people who give you their leftovers, you're not being generous. You're being used. The cruel mathematics of human nature dictate that people value what costs them something and disregard what comes freely. Your constant availability has taught others that your time has no value. Your immediate responses have communicated that your attention is worthless. Your eagerness to help has signaled that your energy is infinite and therefore disposable. You've been operating from emotional bankruptcy while convincing yourself it was generosity. Consider the people in your life who receive your best effort. Do they reciprocate with equal investment? Do they show up for you with the same intensity you show up for them? Or have you created a dynamic where you're always the giver, always the one reaching out, always the one making excuses for their lack of reciprocation? You've been funding relationships that would collapse the moment you stopped paying the emotional bills. True emotional abundance doesn't mean giving endlessly. It means having enough value within yourself that you can afford to be selective. It means recognizing that your emotional energy is finite and precious, worthy of careful investment rather than reckless spending. The people who fascinate you, who seem naturally magnetic, who never appear desperate for connection, they've learned to operate from this abundance. They give strategically, love conditionally, and invest only where they see potential for genuine return. You've mistaken emotional poverty for virtue, thinking that your willingness to be drained by others somehow made you noble. But nobility isn't found in self-depletion. It's found in self-respect. And self-respect demands that you stop funding relationships that leave you empty, while filling others with energy they never learned to generate themselves.